Alrighty, we're just gonna double check that everything sounds good and then we will get going. Let's just make sure everything sounds just right before we take off today. Almost ready, almost there. Just one more second. So sorry. Just make sure. Okay. Good. I think it sounds good. I think it looks good. So let me just share this on Twitter and we will get going. All right. Almost there. So, here we go. Here we go. Almost there. So sorry. Here we go. Okay. Okie dokie. We are good to go. All right. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whoever you are, wherever you are. This is Dr. Patrick Lockwood, and welcome back for another episode of UnShrink Me on this beautiful Saturday afternoon here in LA. Glad you're all here. Thanks so much for showing up and being part of the chat. Phil, I'm glad you're here as well. Good to see you, Phil. So today, for those of you who don't know, if you are brand new to this podcast, this is a weekly podcast focused specifically and only on the topics related to mental health and what will improve your chances of getting everything you possibly can out of the mental health providers you're currently seeking. So this podcast is only and only for consumers of mental health services, people seeing psychiatrists, counselors, coaches, psychologists, people getting testing, whatever you're doing with your mental health provider. This podcast is just to provide a critical approach to the ideas that you may be being fed that may or may not be so good for you. So my whole goal here is just to educate the community and make sure everybody gets the best possible chance to get what they need from the providers they're working with. So that is the whole spirit of UnShrink Me. This is not a political podcast. This is not a research podcast. This is not a professional podcast where I give you professional advice. So just know that is the spirit of this, and I hope that something you hear today helps you make a better decision for your mental health in some way, shape, or form. Today we have lots of very interesting things to talk about, including is mental health destiny? Is your diagnosis your destiny? We also want to talk about being colonizers of the mind. I also want to talk about the concept of differentiation, why it's useful, why it's not useful. I also would like to speak a little bit about AI. I've spoken about this a few times in the podcast. However, there's a couple of updates and developments that are worth everyone understanding so that you can have the best possible chance, again, to get what you need out of your clinician. So I hope everyone understands, and welcome to the podcast. And as always, just so you know, this podcast is not NOT. It is not sponsored by Celsius. However, I do love Celsius and I think it's great. Makes everything better. So today I'd like to start with a softball kind of easy post to discuss. I want to start with AI. And so Angie Peacock is someone I follow on Twitter. I think she's worth following. Let me just repost this right now while we're discussing the topic and you kind of understand why it matters. Hello, Jonathan. Glad you're here, sir. Good to see you. Okay. I'll get to your post, Jonathan, in just a few minutes. But first, I want to warm up with a somewhat easier, lighter topic. So, Angie Peacock, and her handle is at ANGPEACOCK1111. Hello, Virgil. Good to see you there. Good to see you, man. So we have a lot of cool people in the chat. Glad you're here. Ask questions, make comments. I'll respond to them. Glad you're here. So Angie's post, she posted this 4 days ago, so I'll read it as I always do, and then I'll discuss what I think is important about it. So here's what she said specifically. She said, and this is a person who helps people get off of their psychiatric medications for a living. She runs support groups and deprescribing protocol support groups. She said, I am seeking therapy against my better judgment for some personal issues I need to talk about, which is in itself an interesting sentence. One of the consent forms, asked me to consent to, in quotes, AI tools, listening to my session for note-taking purposes and other purposes. I do not consent. Why is this okay? She said. So there are a couple of very interesting things that she said that I think we should all be aware of. Again, dear consumers of therapy, psychiatry, psychology, counseling, this is coming your way if it's not already part of your life. So she said, first and foremost, I am seeking therapy against my better judgment for some personal issues I need to talk about. So let's be clear about this, is that a lot of people have been burned by the therapy field. I think she has as well. She has her master's of social work, and so I think she's chosen not to get licensed because she doesn't want to be hamstrung by the requirements of the licensure world. But that aside, it's for those of you who have been burned by therapy, who have been hurt by the profession, I completely sympathize and can somewhat understand why you don't want to seek out therapy. Totally valid, and I support you. That being said, sometimes, as she says, you reluctantly need extra support because sometimes your own insight, your own skills, your own capacities aren't enough, right? And so I'm glad, Angie, that you're out there seeking therapy. But secondarily, let's talk about your concern about AI tools. So there are a number of AI applications, and they're growing every day. And so these AI applications are literally kind of like dominating the EMR, electronic medical record space. And at some point, people are never going to have to write notes again in the medical professions. Doctors, nurses, radiologists, psychologists, therapists, whatever. It's going to happen. And so this first iteration of AI tools that she's talking about in her post is usually something like essentially a microphone on your computer, which listens to the entire conversation between the two of you and then summarizes it so that it can easily create a therapy note and update a treatment plan. So it's an AI tool that listens to the entirety of your conversation. So it's on the entire time you're talking to the patient. And it's listening and it's taking notes and it's basically making it so that the therapist doesn't have to write the note themselves, and doesn't have to deal with treatment plan updates. So I want to talk about this because this is very important and it's coming to a theater near you. So let's be clear that this is not just a throwaway conversation. She said, why is this okay? And so let me talk about that particular sentence. But before I talk about that, let me go to the comments because my buddy Drew is in the comments and he's saying something very important. Drew says, I worked at a practicum site that offered this sort of software to providers. After trying it, I found it dull. It dulled my conceptualizations. Right. So AI, he worked at a site that had computer software that listened to your entire session and wrote conceptualizations for you. So here's the thing. These AI tools serve the specific purpose of making the providers' lives easier and making everyone's life easier so it's easier to bill and so on and so forth. And thank you, Jonathan, for the emoji, the burp emoji. But the problem is that although these AI tools technically will make things easier, what Drew just said is ethically extremely important, which is AI is going to take these notes on your behalf and it's going to water them down, sanitize them, write them in, healthcare, insurance company friendly language, but also important details will be missing from how AI does this. So Drew's point is extremely important, number one. Number two, to Angie's question, why is this okay? Why is it okay for technology to have permission to listen to the things we're saying? Because not to be too conspiratorial, however, I want you all to consider that, yes, our phones already listen to us and all these things. That being said, it's one thing when the phone is passively listening. It's another thing if your computer is actively listening with some kind of algorithm to determine what's important and not important. So lazy clinicians will love this. And, none of us got into healthcare because we like writing progress notes and communicating via writing. That's fair. However, if we are not clear about what we heard and didn't hear, what matters and does not matter, if we, the professionals, are not the ones determining what is clinically relevant and we just let AI do it, all sorts of fraud and abuse can happen, which can actually hurt patients, not just us. So we can do less quality work and things like that, but it also hurt patients, right? So to Angie's point, this should not be okay to some degree because it will literally marginalize people who are mentally very, very ill, right? So let me just give you a simple and stupid example. If you're in a therapy session and you're really frustrated about someone, and you say like nasty things like, I really hate so-and-so. I wish they would die. They're just the worst person or whatever it is. In ordinary therapy, that is just grist for the mill. That is just something that we know we could talk about with people because people get so angry, they're hurt or they're triggered or whatever. And it's just like not weird to have a strong negative reaction to people. So good therapists are clear that people can say they hate people and it's not like a threat to kill somebody. It's not like a real verifiable threat. But AI, if it's not appropriately, let's say, trained on the right data, or if it doesn't have the correct safeguards on it, could call the cops, alert the authorities on your behalf, right? So I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist per se. However, it's like, do I want AI listening on my sessions and like trying to get people arrested on my behalf? Like that sounds really terrible and Orwellian and horrible. And like you might look at me and say, that guy is a crazy person. I can't believe he even thinks that could happen. AI would never do that. But boy, just you wait. Because AI has already helped people kill themselves and complete suicide. You're telling me it won't help people get arrested? I don't believe that for a second. So to Angie's point, I think this is not okay. I understand 100% why people like the idea of AI listening to your session to make it easier to write your notes and update your treatment plans automatically. I get that. None of us like writing any of this crap. It's all bullshit for healthcare. It's not because it actually makes treatment better. So let's be clear. I'm 100% on board with the spirit of why people want to use AI. It makes things easier, more streamlined, all these things. That doesn't mean it's safe. That doesn't mean it's good for the clinician or the patient. It's going to make us all lazier. It's going to make people who are not very motivated and conscientious lazier. And there's already enough lazy and stupid professionals as it is. So this is not good for them. And it's not going to make things safer for the patients, especially the very mentally ill who say outlandish things because they're very mentally ill. So that's my 2 cents about that. One of our good friends here in the chat says, every administrator is going to push this software. Getting clinician compliance for taking notes is so annoyingly difficult. They are going to push it, especially at these large therapy mill programs. Absolutely. And of course, they're going to push it because there's money to be made. If you can make it easier to get therapy done, you'll keep your staff. Your staff will be happier. They won't be burnt out as much, all these things. So there's all sorts of economic and organizational reasons why AI makes sense. Tons of them. And I sympathize with all of them because I myself am an administrator. I deal with this as a consultant, etc. It's also terrible for the reasons I've said so far. So dear Angie, thank you for the warm-up post to talk about. We have so much to be worried about, and that is really terrible for everybody. All right, I want to talk about my buddy Jonathan Cogburn. If you don't know who this guy is, he's this rowdy Texan that I happen to know and be at least acquaintances with, if not friends with. And this dude is he's a good egg. He's a very interesting character. And the thing I really love there's many things I love about Jonathan, but one of the things I especially love about him is that he's super interested in talking about family and systems theories and applying them to people and patients and systems in a thoughtful way. So he put out a post 2 days ago that I think everyone should be aware of. And Drew here says, is there any other kind of Texan? Well, some Texans aren't my cup of tea, but this dude certainly is. So let me share his post so everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about, and then we can talk about it together. Okay. By the way, for those of you who don't know, if you are brand new and you've never met me or seen me before, if you're just listening for the first time, you can follow my exploits and my insanity on Twitter or X or whatever. My handle is at AlobhaPatrick. ALOBHAPATRICK. Okay. All right, so here's what my buddy Jonathan said a couple of days ago. And as someone who is a professor who teaches at a university, who teaches future master's level clinicians and doctoral level clinicians, this is especially near and dear to my heart. And so I want you all to hear from someone who does this for a living, who's doing it right, in my opinion, talking about it correctly, in my opinion. So here's what Jonathan said 2 days ago. His handle on Twitter, if you don't know him, is at Systemic Texism, which I absolutely love as a handle. So here's what he said. One sign of good training for marriage and family therapy is the ability to track signals of emotional differentiation, in parentheses, or lack thereof, in live interaction, and fold observations about those signals into discussions with the patient about possible targets for change in the process. Now, that's one hell of a big sentence, by the way. So, Jonathan, we got to get you to write in smaller sentences because some of us aren't super smart. We can't follow all the chunks that you got there. So, a little bit of like my personal bias is say more in more sentences, if that makes sense. Anyways, here's what he said, because I'm not a super good word guy. So here's what he said. One sign of good training in marriage and family therapy is the ability to track, emphasis on the word track, signals, emphasis on the word signals, of emotional differentiation or lack thereof in live interaction. Yeah, he says small word gang in the chat. Yes, small word gang. And then part two, after you track the signals of differentiation, you want to fold those observations into the discussions with the patients about targets for change. Okay. So the change process in any work, whether it's individual therapy, family therapy, couples therapy, counseling, group therapy, it doesn't matter what the setting, it doesn't matter what the venue, it doesn't matter what the type of therapy or counseling. Change is a process. It's a process that unfolds over time. And what we have to do is have concrete, tangible things to be focused on so we don't get stuck in weird, ethereal stuff in space. Because it's easy to get, stuck in like, I want to be happy, which is ethereal. There's nothing concrete there, right? Jonathan says, my coworkers tell me to talk normaler all the time. Yes, talk more normal. Join us normies who use small words to survive. So anyways, this idea of a change process is first and foremost extremely important, because if we look at change as discrete, as like stopping at a certain point and not as a process, then we're going to have false expectations about getting better. So to have accurate and healthy expectations about getting better, we have to look at the ongoing lengthy process of change, number one. So props to you, Jonathan, for saying that. Number two, props to you for saying, all we can do as professionals, we are not wizards. I just want to reiterate this because I think some people have very mistaken impressions of what therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists are. A lot of people, unfortunately, think we are some kind of like mind-reading wizards, when in reality, what Jonathan said almost perfectly describes it, which is what we do as professionals is we track signals, we track patterns, we track symptoms, we track signs, right? We track these things. We are actively creating a framework, a story, if you want to think of it like that, of what these signs and symptoms mean. So in this particular tweet, he's talking about tracking symptoms of what's called emotional differentiation. Now, this is a big therapy thing that I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on because it's definitely not my wheelhouse. It's something I absolutely love and incorporate into my family therapy and couples therapy. Excuse me. But it's definitely not something that I spend a lot of time psychoeducating people about because it's very culturally relative and contextual. So anyways, the amount of differentiation is really important in family and couples therapy, but even in individual therapy. And so I want to spend just a couple of minutes saying something about it because this would allow people, I think, in my opinion, to have maybe better boundaries, or at least an understanding of what their therapist is trying to do with them, with their boundaries. He says, I'll happily trade cardigans for a cool wizard robe and staff. Yeah, but I don't think, I personally wouldn't look very good in a wizard robe, so I don't know. So basically, when we're talking about differentiation, we're talking about finding the boundary between our feelings and somebody else's feelings, our needs and somebody else's needs. And so there are many reasons why we might be extremely rigidly differentiated so that we're like literally separate, for instance. And then other people are very enmeshed, right? So when we talk about differentiation, we're usually talking about this spectrum of extremely enmeshed on one end or extremely rigidly separate on the other end. And whatever the truth in the middle is where we generally think people are healthiest, where they're interdependent is a word that people often use. And so I think this idea of differentiation is a really cool family systems concept that is already part of other types of individual therapy, but is a big deal in family and couples therapy. And so just to say a tad more about this on behalf of Jonathan, thank you for this. When therapists are just tracking signs and symptoms of an illness, but they're not looking at the process of how people relate to the outside world, how differentiated they are, how separate or not separate they are from the outside world, we're starting to miss an important variable and change for people. Because if you just look at depression as a single person illness, you have these symptoms of depression and that's it. And that's the illness, and we're going to give you like a therapy, which is akin to penicillin, and that's it. You're missing the fact that everything we do and say is contingent upon other people. So we are social creatures who are constantly bombarded by the outside world, always interacting, literally, with the outside world. So the point is, if we track these signs and symptoms of differentiation, as Jonathan said in his post, and good clinicians do this, no matter what their orientation. What we're doing is we're trying to see not just the one-dimensional version of their illness, which is like, are you depressed? How bad are your symptoms, for example? It's also a question of how does your mood and behavior and motivation show up in the outside world? How do you relate to the world? Because we're not trying to cure your depression or something just to make you feel better. We're trying to make your life better. That's part of what we do as professionals. And so, Jonathan, thank you so much for putting this out there, because the degree of differentiation is actually, I think, a linchpin. It's like a very important component of trying to help people actually live a better life. And then part two of what he posted was, we're trying to fold these observations about how differentiated you are, how enmeshed you are with somebody else, how separate you are from somebody else, into this ongoing clinical relationship, this narrative we have between each other as patient and therapist, so that we can understand how this informs your goals. Because if your goal is to be less depressed, whatever that actually means, who knows? But if your goal is to feel somewhat better, like you have more positive mood, we could talk about how you cope and do behavioral activation or whatever for depression. But also, how do you relate to people? Do you feel overwhelmed by people? Do you feel like you're the same as other people? Are you enmeshed with people? Are you rigidly separate from other people? All these variables actually affect how you treat the individual illness, if that makes sense. Because in reality, I would say, in my opinion, there is no such thing as an individual illness. Every individual illness, a PTSD or a personality disorder, is also a systemic illness. Because how we relate to the world is how we relate to ourselves to some degree. Our friend here in the chat says, one way I note this during sessions is when asking a client about their mind state during a conflict with their partner. They begin to tell you about what they think their partner's mind state was, right? And so how much you think your mind state is similar to someone else's mind state can tell you how enmeshed you are. Because the truth is, if you're paying close attention, we're not the same person. You can be madly in love with someone and have similar values and ideologies and beliefs and culture, but that doesn't mean you're the same person. You're never the same person. And so however similar you think you are is a signal of how enmeshed you are, how undifferentiated you are. And that's a problem. Oh my God, Angie's here. Angie, thanks for coming. So glad you're here. She says, here's what she says. I was just talking about your post, so thank you for coming here. She said, Angie here, my other issue is where are my words being stored and what are these AI tools doing with what I say? If I'm not able to read the fine print, I do not consent. And more power to you, Angie, because I think that's a valid concern. Because imagine it this way, folks. When your therapist writes a note, right? So there's a really giant medical record company called Kipu. Kipu is an EHR, electronic health record. And so, in rehabs all over the country, all over the world, they buy this super expensive, fancy software that allows you to take individual therapy notes, group notes, contact notes, treatment plans, all this stuff. So you've got your EHR, which is your note system, but then there's this AI we're adding to it now. But where is that data stored? It's certainly not being stored in Kipu. It's stored on a separate server somewhere. Now, maybe Kipu owns the AI, but is it being stored in a HIPAA-compliant server? Is that data being sold to somebody? Here's another great question. Is Kipu, I'm just using Kipu as an example, don't sue me, or sue me if you want, I don't fucking care, but is Kipu using an AI model to track notes and all this stuff, and is that data, is the metadata of your illness and your session being sold to Google, being sold to Palantir? Who is getting a hold of this AI session data? And who are they selling it to? Because these AI companies make a ridiculous amount of money selling their data, or at least their metadata. But is it just metadata? Who knows? And so for me, my concern, really genuinely, is exactly your concern, Angie. I have never seen the fine print. I have been asked to use these before, and I just say no. I refuse to do it. Outright, flat out, I will happily write the notes so I can protect people's confidentiality as much as I humanly can as a professional. So, Angie, thank you so much for being here and for chiming in, by the way. Really glad you're here. It means a lot to me that you're here, actually. So thanks for showing up. This is important. Yeah, the more we try to integrate AI into therapists' lives to make it easier for them to do their documentation, and fair enough, I think therapy notes are stupid. I can't believe we have to write them still. It's so fucking stupid. I get the legal reasons. I get the compliance reasons. I get the HIPAA reasons. I get the, we want to protect the public and we want to have a record and see if you hurt somebody and didn't do your job. It's also bullshit, by the way. So for me, as much as I don't want to do notes, and I do not want to do notes, which is why I've moved to being a consultant for the most part, I will happily write them so that my patients are protected from big data, big AI, etc., big tech. Because I don't want people knowing things about my patients ever. I want the outside world to know as little about them as possible. Because the outside world doesn't know shit. He says, all bullshit. Why would I write how I fucked my client up in the notes? I know it is bullshit, right? Yeah. And so it's just, it's one of those things where at some point we're not going to be able to fight it anymore. But for the time being, I say we fight the good fight and don't use AI. That's my opinion. Call me a crazy conservative or something, but I think it's a stupid idea. I'm anti-lazy. Don't be lazy. If you're a clinician out there, don't be lazy. Write your notes. Write them ethically. Write as little as possible. Yeah. All right. So just to circle back to what my buddy Jonathan said, because Jonathan's correct. Emotional differentiation, different types of differentiation are extremely important. And if you're just tracking symptoms, you're missing a giant chunk of who a person is and how their illness, whatever their illness actually is, plays out in the real world. Because some illnesses do not affect the outside world as much. And so if you're overly differentiated, something could be wrong. If you're enmeshed, something could be wrong. We want to find that sweet spot for everyone based upon their culture, their personality, and all these things. So many cool people in the chat here. I freaking love this. This is absolutely awesome. You all don't even know how cool this is that you're all here. So super glad to see a lot of my Twitter friends here in the chats. It's a blessing that I couldn't even imagine trying to artificially create. So you guys are awesome. So thanks again to Jonathan for a very cool, very important, just for what it's worth, post. And now it's time to talk about Nick Tabor, because I always have to talk about my buddy Nick. It's interesting. Something happened this week where someone thought I was unhappy with Nick, which is so weird. So here's where we're going to go. So Nick put out this post 3 days ago, which I said all sorts of stuff about, many different reposts. I'm just going to pick one of the things I said and talk about it in a representative way here on this live stream. So let me just repost this real quick, retweet it, and then we will get going. Okay. So my buddy Nick Tabor, who is appropriately part of the, Let's Not Hurt People with Therapy group, said the following. Opening up, this was 3 days ago, and his handle is NICKTABER. I don't know if I'm saying your name wrong, Nick. Can you tell me if I'm saying your name wrong? Yeah, I love Nick too, man. He says, this was 3 days ago. Here's what he said. He said, opening up your inner life to a therapist very often results in them colonizing it. So it often creates more pain. Now, I did a number of reposts and talked about this in a few ways. So I said, we are colonizers. And I had some other people chime in who didn't like it, but here's what I think is true. So essentially, I think good therapy, I genuinely believe this, and I don't know how many of you in the chat will agree. You certainly don't have to agree. In fact, I welcome all disagreement. I think it's awesome when we disagree. It's good for us. It's good for me in particular. So let me make a case for therapists being colonizers. So, there's the anti-colonial movement in the social justice, political, whatever world nowadays, and I completely understand and empathize with all the bad things that happened and how people were hurt, etc. in history by people who are colonizers. I understand that. It's also literally the case historically that many types of colonizers in history also made those countries phenomenally better in dozens of ways. And so if you helped, people stop being murdered and people stop being killed and things like that, I would say that's probably a pretty good upside of being colonized, for instance. And I think, good therapists are a lot like, pro-social, healthy explorers of the mind who will help colonize your mind. Now, I want to make sure I'm not stepping into any unnecessary bullshit here, which is, I understand that the mind is not some blank canvas where we just get to go in there and create something cool or something like that because we are experts who know exactly what we should be creating. What I'm saying is, in the best case scenario, if we are colonizers, which I think we are, what we would do is we would go into somebody's mind where the person already exists and then collaborate with them as collaborative colonizers, offer what we believe as professionals could be helpful to improve the colony, to improve the land, so to speak. So in real life, it was we offered religion and medicine and protection and industry and technology and economic opportunities and all sorts of things. Now, that is not me trying to whitewash all the terrible things that other colonizers did, like bringing diseases and killing people and raping people and all these things, all of which are real. The terrible is bad, but also the good is true. So the good is true and the terrible is true about colonial efforts by, the worst of offenders is probably the British, right? These were the worst colonizers in history. India, China, South America, so on and so forth. So hey, at least as an American, I'm not one of the worst, right? But what I would say genuinely about this is good therapists do what good colonizers do in history, is they go meet a group of people that live there already and have customs and traditions and ways of living that help them thrive, and then walk in and offer other things that they have no experience of or knowledge of, and see if we can work together to create a mutually beneficial arrangement that makes everybody's life better. So we don't take over the place and control it like the mob or the cartel or whatever. Although, in all seriousness, I think I trust the mob and the cartel far more than I trust the government. But that's just personal stuff aside. But we are not, as therapists, colonizing people's minds and taking over them. So maybe Nick implied that or something. I don't think he did. I think his worry is some therapists, and I want to say this as clearly and as dispassionately as possible. To steelman Nick's point, I imagine there are some people who are in psychiatry, psychology, out here in Rehabistan, where I live, counseling, Christian counseling, whatever subtype of clinical work it is. I imagine there are people who are know-it-alls, who believe they are so smart and they're such experts that they and they alone know exactly what a patient should be doing. They're so smart and they're so talented, they know the patient so well that they should be telling you what to do to save your life or whatever it is. Which means that we're no longer being professionals and clinicians, we're being gurus, right? So it is my opinion that those guru types who know everything about you, know everything you should do, who are perfectly knowledgeable and in charge of your life, or should be in charge of your life in their minds, those people are dangerous, because those are the people who would go loot and plunder and rape people in history. And so I agree that there are those types of healthcare providers who exist to this day who do those kinds of things. And unfortunately, I think they are more common than people would like to admit. So to steelman Nick's point, I think he's correct that there's a large subpopulation of people in the profession who actively believe that they are so smart, such experts, such professionals, that they so perfectly or so correctly understand you and even can predict your future to some degree, that they know what you should do, you should think, and you should feel, which is absolute horseshit. Because if you're an ethical clinician who understands your boundaries and your countertransference issues, you understand that playing God makes you the bad guy, makes you the problem. So when you're an ethical clinician, you never assume that you are more than 50% responsible for the patient's well-being and their outcomes, which means that you can never perfectly know the future. I mean, I don't know how many of you in the chat have been doing this for long enough, but I have been around long enough to know that as much as I think I know the outcome, there are many, 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 many times where I am proven wrong over and over and over again. So my prediction machine is pretty good, but it's not that good. And I don't think there's a world in which I would ever exist where I'd be amazing at it, because people are unpredictable, people lie to you, and there's information you don't know. So it's really important for everyone to understand that good therapists, ethical clinicians, never try to control you, coerce you, or tell you what to do. Ethical clinicians are trying to collaborate with you to explore experiments we can do together. And so the clinicians that Nick is talking about, the colonizers who are there to rape and plunder and pillage, those people are evil. Those people are disgusting and terrible for the profession. But they exist. There are lots of narcissists in the profession who do not understand their desire to be special and important, to sound smart, to have control over people, to influence them so strongly that they feel good about themselves as professionals. So that is part of the problem. But then I think there's the healthy version of this. So I think there's such a thing as healthy professional colonialism. Dear Nick, I think good therapists are like good colonizers. They go into an area that's already habitable, that's already inhabited. So there are people that have already been living there. So in therapy, to use this metaphor, the person that's already been living there is the patient and all the family members in their mind and so on and so forth. So there's already people living there. So we are not walking in and taking charge of the place like the mob or the evil governments do, or the evil colonizers who are religious or whatever, the conquistadors, whatever, right? We are not that. Good therapists are the colonizers who walk in and go, hey, this is what I observe. These are the traditions I understand. These are the processes I'm observing. This is my culture. This is what I understand. These are things that I think could be helpful based upon what I'm observing. And then we collaborate as equals. What if we tried this? What if we tried that? What if we tried that? Which is where informed consent becomes such an important thing. Because if you don't use informed consent, then what happens is you become God and you become a guru and you're there to colonize and take over the place. Whereas healthy colonizers, as clinicians, are the people who are there to collaborate, to cooperate, not to tell people what to do. Buddy Virgil here says, what's harder is when clients beg you to control them, often due to anxiety. It's when inexperienced or less competent therapists most often fall into controlling or advice-giving stances. Absolutely. Because there's a lot of people with different types of mental health problems who are very vulnerable to the guru types. And inexperienced clinicians in particular, thank you for pointing this out, are especially vulnerable themselves to this codependent or countertransference driven way of functioning, which is, I want to rescue you. I want to help you. I want to, whatever it is, whatever the internal reaction is, it's like, I see you suffering. I can't tolerate your distress, so I'm going to do something to get rid of it right now. And as all of us hopefully know, and if you don't know this and you're a patient, when you try to avoid and distract from your distress, you actually worsen it. So that's bad for you and bad for everybody. It's bad for the clinician and bad for the patient. It's a terrible habit to try and solve somebody's suffering right now. Because when you don't learn to tolerate your distress, you worsen it. The more you distract and avoid, the worse it gets, generally speaking. So you're right, man. Like, trying to control the patient, advice giving is terrible. And some patients are especially interested in it. So for instance, just to give a simple example, for those of you who don't know, obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, is an illness that is very hard to treat because one of the pathological components of OCD is this excessive reassurance-seeking behavior people with OCD do. And so the average person who's a clinician with normal functioning empathy or something will see that reassurance seeking they do and go, oh, wow, this person is so distressed and terrible. They need my support. They want to know if they're okay. Will it be okay? And they want to reassure them, which is the worst possible thing you could do when you're trying to do ACT or OCD kind of ERP treatment. So it's actually a terrible idea to engage in reassurance behavior with the patient because it worsens their illness and prolongs their avoidance of their feelings. There's no distress tolerance there. So just to get back to Nick's post, though, we are colonizers of the mind, and some people want to be taken advantage of. I'm going to say that phrase again. There are some people, this might be hard to believe, but I promise you these people exist. There's a very rare subset of the human population who comes to therapy who are looking to get hurt or be taken advantage of or be controlled because that's what they grew up with usually. Usually they grew up with very abusive parents, controlling parents, and so they reenact that dynamic, or they attempt at least to reenact that dynamic with their therapist. So this happens with trauma victims a lot. This happens with people who were in intimate partner violence relationships a lot. So it's very important to be clear that people will try to emotionally push the therapist into certain directions and reaction patterns. So good therapy involves being aware of the process that's happening between the two of you so that you don't get stuck in a pattern that's pathological for the patient. Drew just commented something, so I want to read it because I think it's relevant as well. Drew said, as a grad student, it was hard for me to learn the difference between advice giving and using your expertise to offer options the client can choose from. That's a really excellent summary, Drew, so thanks for sharing that. So yeah, offering people options, if they want those options, is not advice giving. Advice giving is saying, I fully understand your situation, therefore this is the one thing you should do, which is narcissism. It's being a guru. Drew says, I'm trying. I'm still a grad student, but I try not to do it anymore. Good. Don't do it anymore, Drew. Get good supervision. Yeah. So advice giving is, I, in parentheses, inaccurately believe I know so much about your circumstance that I can perfectly tell you what to do. Because if this was fixing an engine, you could tell the new mechanic what to do, right? Because engines are complex machines that are closed systems. They're not dynamic changing systems like the mind. So if you're trying to fix an engine, you certainly could give advice because, if there's a misfire in one of the cylinders, you got to change whatever's causing that misfire, whether it's a spark plug that's dirty or whatever it is. And so because it's a simple pop in, pop out situation, advice is perfect. If you're trying to teach someone to be a mechanic or a plumber or an electrician, advice is perfect. If you're trying to help someone become a better therapist, advice is terrible. It's terrible for the grad student who's getting trained. It's terrible for the patient. Because brains and minds are not machines. And anyone who uses that metaphor is an idiot. It's not true. I promise you. The mind is way more complicated than a machine. The mind is an ecosystem that's made up of you and your unique brain and body, but also other people's minds, which interact in a dynamic way that's not linear or predictable. So, when we see the mind like an ecosystem and not a machine, that's what I call the broken Rolex fallacy, by the way. When you see the mind as an ecosystem, you have respect for the fact that people are dynamic and changing and non-linear, not simple closed systems. So we should never be giving advice, basically, as professionals, because we're not capable of knowing all the variables and predicting all the variables accurately enough to see what happens, which is why what Drew said is so important. As opposed to giving advice, ethical clinicians, if you want, to go back to what I said, if you want options, we can give you options we can try as an experiment. But if you don't want options, then we don't offer you options. And this is where this is crucial, back to the colonizer thing. So colonizers who are warlords and conquistadors and things like that will just walk into the place, take over, kill people, rape people, so on and so forth. There's no consent. It's not collaborative. It's not with the purpose of exploring and supporting a culture. It's with the purpose of dominating and taking over. And I know there are therapists who operate that way, sometimes knowingly, often not knowingly. But us ethical clinicians want to walk into this environment called your mind and collaborate consensually. We want to collaborate and offer options based upon what we know in a limited way, because we don't know everything, number one. We don't even know enough, number two. And number three, what little we know means we have such a limited list of options we can try. He says, my other reason advice is bad, even when it works, is it steals the patient's power. Yes, we are here to help people feel empowered, not to disempower them by telling them what to do. If I'm right, I get the credit, he says. If I'm wrong, it's my fault. So I want people to be empowered. You and I think both want people to be empowered. And if we tell people what to do, we're robbing them of choice, because we're the professionals with all the pressure. And so people are often pressured by us, unintentionally even. So that's why offering options consensually, if you want the option. So good therapists do what, motivational interviewing teaches us. So for those who don't know, MI is a great intervention style that allows us to, as respectfully as possible, interact with people to help them achieve their goals. So one of the most important skills you learn when you teach people MI, when you practice MI, is called asking for permission, which is exactly, literally what it sounds like. So here's how this would look. If your therapist is ethical in practicing motivational interviewing with you, they might say things like, hey, I heard you say you have this problem. Would it be okay? This is the asking for permission part. Would it be okay if I shared some ideas about your problem? That's option one, version one. Version two, would it be okay if we explored potential solutions to this problem you just listed? Would it be okay if we explored potential solutions for this problem? That's about as non-coercive as it gets, if that makes sense. So, to me, to be a good colonizer, which I guess is my sales pitch for today, if you're out there and you're in graduate school, learn to be a good colonizer, I guess, which is learn to be a collaborator who has ideas and experiences, your own culture, your own expertise, if you have expertise, and learn how to share it with people in the motivational interviewing kind of way, where you're respecting their autonomy, you're respecting their experience, you're respecting whatever they actually are willing to do and not willing to do. It's not our job to make people more willing to do what we think is good for them. It is our job as professionals to offer ideas and to consensually try experiments based upon those ideas. So if it's like, I think, here's the example. Here's just a simple, concrete example. Patient walks into your office and says, because I work in Rehabistan, I hear this, it's like, I think my drinking is a problem. Now, if I was being a bad colonizer, I'd be like, okay, stop drinking. You should stop drinking right now. Drinking is terrible for you. Alcohol is a poison. That's a fact, by the way. So, I can hit you with facts against your will, non-consensually, or I can do it the motivational interviewing kind of way. Open-ended reflections, things like that. So, hey, I think I just heard you say was you're really kind of struggling with your alcohol. Is that right? And they say yes. And so then you ask an open-ended question. How interested are you in changing that alcohol use behavior right now? That's a scaling question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in changing your alcohol use behavior right now? And then you can follow that up with it asking for permission. So they say, I'm at like a 7 out of 10. I'm pretty ready to start changing my alcohol use behavior. Great. So it sounds like you're very motivated. So would it be okay, asking for permission, would it be okay if I shared some ideas that might help you with your alcohol use behavior? That's asking for permission. They can say yes, they can say no. Now, if you want to go solution-focused about it, solution-focused therapy is great, by the way. So you ask for permission. Would it be okay if we explored ways to, help you with your alcohol use problem? They say yes. And then the solution-focused approach, which I love, is, well, what's worked for you in the past when you've tried to cut down or stop drinking? Because maybe, just maybe, people aren't stupid, is the assumption in solution-focused therapy, which I love, by the way. Phil says, turn the page. Yeah, well, often that's the best choice. For some people, they're not ready for that page turn yet, though. So that's why solution-focused therapy is great. Find the exceptions to the problem. Look for examples in history of what has helped. Because almost everyone who comes to therapy to change a behavior has done something already that's worked. People are not stupid. People are not helpless. They might feel helpless, but that doesn't mean they actually are. So, dearest Nick, to get back to the original point here, I think good therapists are good colonizers. They're good collaborators. They're companions. They're people who walk with you through change that you want to have happen. And we only stay on the land in this metaphor, which is your mind and reality, as long as you want us there. And it's that simple. And that's what good, ethical clinicians will do, is we're only involved with you as long as you want us there. We're not here any longer than you want us there. Now, in history, most colonizers did not follow those rules I just listed. They did just stay way too long. So that metaphor does look really bad and toxic, but I promise you that in therapy, that is not what we are here to do. We are here to actually only be there as long as we need to be there. And it's that simple. You know what? There are tons of other posts that I would love to talk about. I want to talk about diagnosis and destiny and all this stuff. I'm going to end on a really, really simple post because I feel compelled to talk about this because I said I would at some point. So I'm going to retweet this real quick. Okay. So Lori Gottlieb is someone that I follow. She's a therapist, I believe, who has a pretty popular podcast and a couple of books, I believe. So on February 3rd, this is what she said. And her handle is at Lori, Lori, Gottlieb, Gottlieb 1, number 1. She said, our listeners were nearly unanimous on this. Yes, sometimes lying is the most loving thing you can do. And she showed a picture of different scenarios, and she listed an example of from dementia care to sparing unnecessary suffering. We explored when honesty heals and when it harms. So I said on the exact same day, something, road to hell, ... something, good intentions. And Here's what I would say is that I understand that people want to use white lies or little lies to make people feel better, to spare them. Because in the moment, the suffering is so intense or the situation is so terrible that a brief lie helps us get through that terrible situation. So she mentioned like dementia, right? So if you're dealing with an older person, for instance, who has like Alzheimer's or something, and they're near death and they're dying and they can't remember who you are and they're worried and all this stuff, do you lie to that person about the thing they're worried about, knowing that they're not going to remember because Alzheimer's destroys your memory? Number 2, so do you pacify them because you know their memory is not going to work? But number 2, do you make yourself feel better? That you help them feel better? Because who cares anyways, they're going to die in 6 months anyways. And I completely understand there's a practical reality, which is some situations are so foobar, literally so foobar, that there's no way that it's ever going to catch up with you if you lie and the person's gone and everything's okay. Here's what I will say for myself personally and as a clinician. I do not lie to my patients. I do not lie to my friends and my family. I do everything in my power not to lie to people. I'm sure I have. So I'm not saying I'm perfect or some shit like that. I'm just saying I do everything in my power never to lie to people, because in almost every situation, it might be okay short term. But if I continue to lie to people to make them feel better, to make myself feel better, to make the situation easier, etc., although it might spare people some harm, it will erode my baseline ability to be a person of integrity, which is important for so many areas of my life. So selfishly and for the sake of being good at my job, taking care of people, so on and so forth, I need to not lie. So it's actually important to have integrity, not to lie. Really, really important. And it's this road to hell thing. It's this terrible, perfect circumstance where a little lie actually makes everything easier and better. And I'm sure there are tons of exceptions, but it's still not worth your integrity. It's not worth the core piece of yourself that keeps you upright and motivated and walking in the direction that's good for you and the world. So don't do it. Don't do little lies. I completely disagree with Lori's audience. I get it. I can make up so many examples where it makes perfect sense to tell just a little bit lie because it's such a short-term thing or the person's about to die or whatever it is, but I don't think that makes life better, more meaningful. It doesn't make us healthier. I don't think so. I think that little bit of harm that comes from telling the truth is usually not catastrophic in causing people to die. So, for what it's worth, that's my take on lying. Well, thank you all for being here today. It's been awesome having you here. The chat today has been especially active. So many cool people in the chat. Many of my Twitter mutuals here in the chat. Jonathan says, we followed the outdoor code while camping in someone's dome. That's right. Leave nothing, take only pictures. Though I don't think I take pictures of my patients. Anyways, so leave the place better than you found it, if you can. So for me, I would say that this has been a very successful episode because so many cool things have been said. So many people chimed in awesome ways. Thank you so much. If you think this episode was helpful in some way, I hope that you like and share and subscribe. Please help me get the word out about this podcast because I think there are so many people who are in graduate school learning to be therapists. There's so many people who have a loved one in therapy or in rehab or whatever it is who don't know about this podcast, who could be helped by it. And my only goal, which is what I said at the beginning of this podcast, is just to help people find a more specific, more realistic way of looking at their treatment so that they get the most out of it. So my goal, although I'm very critical, is to actually build up the good ideas so that people get more out of their clinical life, their clinical work, their professional relationship. So that's the spirit of this podcast. I'm just trying to help. I'm not trying to hurt. This is not therapy advice, so don't sue me. I mean, feel free if you want to. Yeah. So it's good seeing you all. I have no joke prepared for today. I'm so sorry. So we're just going to have to end the old-fashioned way, which is thank you so much for being here. Please follow me on Twitter if you're not already doing that. Please follow the Psychology Checkup, my podcast. It's so lovely to have you here for this 55th episode of UnShrink Me, and I will see you again next Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Please take very good care of yourselves, Angie, everyone who's been here. Have good food, have good sex, have good fun, laugh, enjoy good movies, take care of each other, take care of yourself, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.